Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Building Better from Disruption webinar series. We're so happy and excited that you are able to join us today for what promises to be a very robust conversation regarding our social emotional learning with a specific focus on the impact and utilization of student voice. My name is Cynthia Glover Woods, and I'm happy to be the host of our series today. And before we go any further, I'd like to introduce to you the president of Growing Inland Achievement, Dr. Carlos Ayala, as he brings welcoming remarks to us this afternoon. Dr. Ayala?
Thank you, Dr. Glover Woods. It is an honor to be here with such learned colleagues addressing a very important issue in our educational system at this time. Growing Inland Achievement is a regional collective impact organization, and our goal is to bring economic and educational equity to the Inland Empire. In my conversations with Patricia Mercer from the Hewitt Foundation last year, we were talking about all the things that school districts and colleges are learning about how to serve students and how to find better ways to support their success. And we posited the idea of collaborating with both county offices of education, San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools and Riverside County Office of Education, to create a series of discussions around what we believe are some really important areas that we need to think hard about to best serve our students. And this is the first of a series, and Dr. Glover Woods is going to speak more to that. So with that being said, I want to thank the Hewitt Foundation for the support for this work, and I want to thank you, Dr. Glover Woods, for being the host of this series. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayala. And I want to let you know it's definitely an honor and a privilege to be able to serve as a host for this very, very important series and these very important topics that we will engage in over the next few months. For this afternoon, what we are really going to focus on again is social emotional learning with a specific focus on the impact and the importance of the student voice. And I am just honored to be able to share the screen, if you will, with so many distinguished educators that are practitioners in the field and doing the work. I'd like to introduce to you those who you will hear from over this next period of time. We have Dr. Kimberly MacKinney, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Grande Unified School District. Welcome, Dr. MacKinney. We also have Dr. Henry Herreras, who is the principal of Excelsior Charter Schools in Corona-Norco. Welcome to you, Dr. Herreras.
Thank you.
We have Pat Schlosser, Assistant Superintendent from Apple Valley Unified School District, way up there in the high desert. So good to see you. And last but definitely not least, Mark Lenore, Assistant Superintendent in Val Verde Unified School District. So again, welcome to all of you. We're so excited that you had time to share today some of the things that are happening within your school systems in order to support students in their social emotional learning and really gathering student voice. It's no secret, and I have to tell you, I love the title of this series, which is Building Better from Disruption. We've had so many things that have happened since March of 2020. Education has taken a look and a feel that I don't think any of us would have ever anticipated when we decided to go into this field. And while there were many things that were areas for cause, there are also many things that we can learn from and many very great aspects that have come from the disruption of our response to the health pandemic. And what we will be doing is having conversations and highlighting some of those, again, very key best practices, strategies, ways to go about educating young people that perhaps we were not doing in this quite the same way prior to the pandemic. Now, as I shared with you, we have a host of panelists, but for those of you who are participants, you also may engage in the conversation. We want to let you know that in the chat, you will have a link to an area called Pigeonhole. And this will be an area where you can put in questions, comments, things that you feel help to add to the conversation. And then we will be able to visit some of those questions and comments as we go through our webinar series today. So again, we're all together, even though we're all in our virtual spaces. So I want you to feel free to be as active and engaged as necessary for this important topic. As we lead off, I'd like to lead off with the student voice. And I'll be sharing with you a statement that was made by a high school student in a survey that was done by Youth Truth. Now, Youth Truth conducted a survey with students and received over 270,000 open-ended responses from students. And they did a qualitative analysis of the comments, especially those that were coded for "listen to me." The quote that I'm going to read to you now are words directly from a student. And I think really for all of us who are here on the screen as participants and for our panelists, this is really the springboard for our conversation. Because as they sometimes say, out of the mouths of babes comes a lot of things that we need to know and hear. So this student says in his or her written response, "I know these times are unprecedented and no one really has known what to do. But the lack of change gives me, the student, an impression that you've given up on us. Please listen to us. Do the right thing and please do something. This is your best feedback that you're going to get. Please listen to it and do something. I just had to get that off my chest. Please, if someone reads this, hear out my ideas for school. Why even ask in the first place if you aren't going to listen? I sincerely hope you understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from, because I'm almost ready just to completely give up on getting an education. Do something, make changes, do better." And that was a quote from a student in spring of this year, so just a few months ago. So as a lead-in, we know that across our state and within the Inland Empire in both Riverside and San Bernardino counties, many of our school districts are doing quite a bit to utilize student voice to transform schools and to transform districts. So I'd like to start with you, Assistant Superintendent Lenore, if I can, and just find out, in Val Verde, what are ways that you are going about motivating and re-engaging students as they return to in-person learning this school year?
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Some of what we're doing, we've been doing for some time. The pandemic has given us the opportunity to continue utilizing ways that we capitalized off student voice, but it also gave us the opportunity to pivot and adjust and look for new ways of harnessing the input that we get from students. During the pandemic this last school year, we formed a student task force committee where we were checking in with our students, and we were doing this on a weekly basis. And this gave us the opportunity to find out what are the real issues that they're struggling with. How is it going for them? How is it going for their families? What obstacles are they encountering? How is their family being impacted by COVID? This gave us a lot of information to go off of to start seeing what can we do to harness student voice and make things better for them so that we are supporting them better. And one of the ways we did that is when it came down to social emotional well-being, the students were asking, is there a way we could actually get those services provided to us without having to go through an adult referring us for these services? And so we're a one-to-one school district. We looked into it, what we could and couldn't do. And we came up with a way where students can self-refer themselves over for mental health services if they felt the need, if they were struggling with something. We did a number of things like all the school districts out there, but I think I'm really proud of the work of my ed services team and what they came up with. But just prior to the school year, we started a 2-week summer program where we invited all of our students back early so that they can get reacquainted or acquainted to their schools, and just kind of get back into the rhythm of things. We had a focus on social emotional learning lessons and making sure kids were well aware of their campus, where they go, who they needed to talk to for help or support if that was what was needed. As the school year started, though, we have school-wide morning talks that go on at all of our schools. We have additional staff that we were fortunately able to garner through the additional funding that we received. We spent roughly about $7.5 million on additional mental health staff, counseling staff, restorative practices, coaches for each of our campuses, and just seeing what we could do to check in, make connections with these kids, and see what we could purposefully do to make sure that all of their needs were being addressed. The school-wide morning talks are going very well. We get a lot of input from that. We look at that information and we continue to see what we can do to make adjustments to. In addition to the school-wide morning talks, some of our schools are doing school-wide morning walks and really seeing what they could do to get our kids more physically active. And the rationale behind this is, if you dive into this, there's so many articles that are coming out that shows that physical activity really helps reduce anxiety, makes students feel better about themselves, makes students feel more alert in class, gives them that opportunity to be even that much more successful. So we've actually even been doing things like that. And we've been very intentional with making sure we're celebrating, monitoring, and confronting issues that come up that get in the way of us being able to further support our students. And when we celebrate, we make sure that we are implementing some of the lessons that we've learned from being in distance learning. So the celebrations are taking place in person, but are also taking place remotely through social media, so that the students have more opportunities to feel recognized and for their parents to be involved. Other things that we're doing is we're doing district-wide staff development on mindfulness, make sure the needs of our staff are being met. We kind of figure if our staff needs are being met, then our student needs will probably be most likely met. We found ways to celebrate and get our parents involved in the parenting process and recognizing them, seeing what we could do to build capacity with those parents. And so if they do get recognized, each of them get a book on what they could do to further support their capacity as a parent. So I'm really proud of the measures that are taking place in Val Verde, as well as what I'm seeing in other districts. We're learning from others and just trying to take those great ideas and utilize them as we hear about them, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for sharing. Again, very powerful things that are happening there, and that check-in with students that your district did, especially starting the beginning of our response to the pandemic, is so key, so that students did not feel they were just out without that extra support, and the recognition that during this time when students were engaged in distance learning, many of them, when they returned to in-person instruction, had not only changed grades, but changed schools from elementary to middle school or junior high to high school. And having that opportunity for them to get reacquainted definitely, I'm sure, was of great support, because that's a nerve-wracking time at any time for a student, and especially after not being in school for a period of time and going to a brand new space when you return also is. So I thank you so much for sharing that. And you just kind of brought in hearing that student voice. They were asked to remove barriers so that they could self-refer. You were able to hear the student voice and respond, as our opening quote, the student in our opening quote said, and to do something. Assistant Superintendent Schlosser, I'd like to find out from you, out there in Apple Valley, what ways are students able to provide that student voice? Assistant Superintendent Lenore spoke to being able to hear the student voice, but how do we even get to hear what their voice is? What are some of the things you're doing in Apple Valley?
Yeah, I was really interested to hear, that talk about the walk and talk. What a neat idea to be able to kind of walk with students and listen to them in that comfortable atmosphere and attending to that. So in Apple Valley and actually in response to or as part of our learning from a session last year with growing inland achievement, we connected with Youth Truth. So I'll put the student voice into two main categories, kind of systemic, large numbers of survey type data, and then personal story and narrative data. So we gather them both. And so systemically, we do now use Youth Truth. We have used the Gallup poll and other measures. Here's the benefits to doing something large like that. It does take a little bit of time. But what it gives you is a year-to-year comparison, which is fantastic to be able to take a look at student trends over time, how they're answering questions having to do with their culture, school culture. You can have customizable or rather targeted fields that have to do with things like distance learning, which we did. And that information was incredibly useful. And when we're gathering from our student body of 13,000 with grades 3 through 12 at about 10,000, we were able to get, I want to say 6,000 or 7,000 of those. So 60 to 70% of the students eligible to answer, which just gives us wonderful data. Also, it gives you a national and state comparison. So we can get a sense sometimes in our own, what we're hearing out in the world. And we can sometimes either over or underestimate how students are doing, but it's nice to have a kind of a check-in. How are our students in Apple Valley doing in some of these measures compared to the average student in California, and then the average student across the nation on some of these topics or some of these questions? Things like, are you proud of your school? And how comfortable are you? Having to do with rigor and grading. And then also for us at the district level, it's really nice to see a school by school comparison to kind of see by grade level at a school site, is there an area where there might need to be some extra support or help? And so that Youth Truth is one tool that's what we use to gather that systemic large number survey. And then we have a large number to take that data then, of course, sharing it where it needs to be shared, but also with personal stories. And that comes through principals cabinets and the superintendent cabinet, gathering groups of students who are not typical student leaders, but rather students who from a wide variety of student groups across campus, to then take and ask them that very question that Mark mentioned, which is, what are the barriers? But then because they're there with us for a day, and sometimes we meet with them quarterly, to then ask the follow-up question, why is that a barrier? What could we do to remove that barrier? And this is where the good stuff happens, right? Because then we get an opportunity to hear their stories. And the stories are what matters, right? Then we can take that back and say, here's what a student said. And Cynthia, I got to thank you for opening with a student quote, right? Because that's the power of this, is to take a story and words from a student and say, here's what they said. The best thing we've been able to do on this end is to take them and show them the student voice survey generally and ask them to react to that, to prioritize what they think is most important, and to give voice to those anonymous then voices. And so what we've been able to do with that is then take and focus priorities in the LCAP. And then to go back the following year and said, you guys said this was important. Did you notice a change? And for them to think, oh my goodness, you mean you heard us? You put money into a goal that's because we said this was important, you did a thing. And for them to realize, oh my goodness, look, this got better. And so now they are agents of change in their school, and their voice gets more clear. And so we've had wonderful success at having that two-pronged approach, the large survey with good demographics and good data, but also the personal stories that drive that home and make us really hear it.
That is so powerful. And just having that two-pronged approach that really allows to give voice to the voiceless. Many times when people think about gathering student voice, the default is to go to those whose voices we typically hear on our campuses, but to really give opportunity for students who we wouldn't typically hear from, and being very intentional and giving them a forum in which to share their thoughts and ideas is so, so key. And I think we just need to rename this session Do Something. And you just showed, Pat, how from that student voice, there were specific things written into the LCAP, which then showed students that you're not just talking in the air. We're not just trying to check off a box saying that, hey, we spoke to students, but your voice does indeed matter. Dr. Herreras and Dr. MacKinney, I'd like to give you an opportunity if there's other ways that you might be collecting student voice and hearing from the students on your campuses, please feel free to jump into this part of a conversation before we go to the next question.
Thank you, Cynthia. One thing that being a site principal, I get the opportunity to meet with kids on a regular basis. And that's one thing we were able to do here on our campuses, set up meetings with our ASB leaders. So we're able to talk to them, and I do bi-weekly meetings with them so I can actually sit down, have dedicated time to meet with them. But I also get the opportunity to go out on campus and see all the other students that are on campus. And we kind of sit down together during lunchtime. That's one of the benefits I have of a small campus. I get to meet with them. We get to sit down during lunch, just talk about things, whether it's the academics, athletic programs, intramurals that are going on, or anything that's going on within their classroom or their families. And the good thing about it is they see that we're there with them, just talking to them as people. And I think that's one thing that our students really appreciate, is that they get the opportunity to talk to a person, not just an administrator, not just a teacher, but somebody who sees them as an individual on campus.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. MacKinney?
So a lot of the same strategies that everyone has mentioned, we're doing as well. One of the pieces that we have done as we were moving through the pandemic, we were utilizing student voice as we were trying what our schedule would look like. We went through many iterations because we wanted to listen to what the students had to say. And so, you know, as we were hearing from them in our student thought sessions through the pandemic, we were hearing over and over SEL type of issues coming up, that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of not connecting with their new classmates because they had changed schools, changed grades, all of those things. And so one of the pieces that we did during that time was we reflected on that, and then we totally redid our Friday schedule of what Friday at school looked like, and built it around SEL and intervention. And students had choice of which teachers they went to go see. Everyone checked in with their homeroom. It was a SEL based day that they had lessons or they had informal activities. We had one class that they wanted to do a talent show. They didn't really know much about the students in their class. So they did a Zoom talent show during that 20-minute for those who wanted to share and get to know people. And then from that, the teacher took that information to help build the connection, and it all triggered from the small group discussions. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's do something with the information that we give you. And so that's one of the pieces that we've really tried to do through this pandemic.
Again, just so powerful, so powerful. And, you know, my inquiring minds, and I'm sure the inquiring minds of all of the participants are wanting to know even more about, you know, what is the feedback you're hearing from students? We heard in Val Verde, some of the thoughts that were expressed was remove the barriers. When we want to receive help or support, we don't want to have to go through someone. Can we self-refer ourselves? You know, look at the schedule, you know, out there in Oro Grande. What are some of the other things that you're hearing from students? Anyone can jump in on this if you'd like.
There was a continuation of the social emotional impact that the pandemic had on our students. One of the things that they were talking about was how they can relate to school. When they come to school, it's a little bit different because they've been at home for over a year and a half. We had students who are in high school now who haven't been on campus since they were in middle school. So one thing that we were talking about was how we can alleviate that stress, that anxiety that they have. So we partnered with the county, and we're developing a Zen Garden for our students. One thing we want to make sure that Zen Garden is used for when students are on campus, if they feel the anxiety, if they feel that they're kind of just losing that opportunity to be with students, we want them to take that time, walk out there, get refreshed, get refurbished, and have the opportunity to recharge their batteries before they can go on campus. It's an opportunity for them to stay on campus, still be on campus, and have that opportunity to continue their education, although they get a chance to kind of de-escalate their situation before they go on into the classroom.
The Zen Garden, what a very interesting idea. Can you Henry, do you mind? I'm trying to visualize the Zen
Yeah.
Garden. Can you help us visualize what that looks like? It sounds like a place that I want to go to.
So we've
So,
talked to the students and we're asking them about, what they wanted to have on it. So we kind of designed it around the student ideas. Right now, we've got a couple waterfalls that are being built. We have some pergolas that are going up so students can sit underneath it. We're going to have about 4 benches in there, so different areas. And around the benches are going to be some trees, some bushes, something that they can just kind of sit back, listen to some sounds. We're going to have some speakers out there, wireless speakers that are going to play some relaxing music, something that they can just go to, relax, get back to where they need to be, recharge themselves, and then head out. Part of the Zen Garden is going to have a little stage out there where we're going to have some yoga. So we'll have some yoga mats out there. The kids can do some yoga, stretching, do something to get back into where they need to be, get focused, and then get back into the classroom and continue their education. It's going to be a nice opportunity for students and staff, because the other part we want to make sure is get the staff also taken care of, like they said earlier.
most definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that and just how powerful. Yes, Dr. Ayala.
Yeah, so I just listening to this conversation, I thought it would be important to let the panelists and participants know that our community colleges are ringing this bell about elevating the student voice, and we've had the privilege here at GIA to work with Crafton Hills College and conduct a student voice project. It was a asynchronous social media driven focus group process. So basically what we did is Dr. Ivana Olivares reached out to a group of students that she found on Facebook and another Instagram and other places. And then she conducted a survey with them and she collected that information. And it was very powerful for the campus. The president there was able to take that information and actually change practices that were happening on campus to better serve students in a short period of time. And the kinds of things that those students were talking about was, having the right kinds of access to broadband and computers, and the right kinds of social emotional supports like food and being able to speak with counselors. But I thought that was a really interesting way of getting information as well. When the students go from the K-12 to the community college, it's harder to kind of corral the kids together, right? And so, having a social media platform, we did the same thing with high school students as well. We used that approach with high school students as well to get an idea of what their college going aspirations were. And of course, all the students we talked to had lots of aspirations for that. But that's just another method that I wanted to put out there. And we could give out more information about that. If others are interested, they could reach out to us, to me, and I can give them more context about that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it just helps to underscore how important tending to the social emotional needs of students really are, and that it's not something that we are just looking at in K-12 or TK-12, if you will, but also something that is permeating through the higher education communities as well. And, when we think again about building better from the disruption, I think one thing that adults have definitely figured out, and young people have as well, is how essential it is for us to have those opportunities to really attend to our social emotional self, as well as all of the other areas of ourselves that we attend to. So there are some phenomenal things happening in each of your districts. And I'd like to just find out if you're having any conversations within your districts or schools about increasing opportunities for student voice. And if so, how might you increase from what you're doing now, and what benefit do you see from that?
One thing I'll say is that once you get this kind of information and it starts to, you see empowered students, right, who feel as though they have agency and voice, it causes you to see I see a general sense that there's an urgency to this now. We've moved our survey up in the year from spring to fall, so it can inform kind of the rest of the year. And I'll point out one other thing that I think helps drive this, and that is, in some cases, it's nice to see where students and maybe staff or parents' perceptions differ. Like, we believe a thing, the school site staff might say, yes, when students need help, we always give them help. But when students answer that same question, they answer it maybe differently or slightly differently. And that doesn't mean anything other than their perception's different. And it matters. It matters because they have to feel as though that help is there. And so being able to show that to students and also to staff is really, those discrepancies are powerful to kind of just be a myth buster about what it is we think we're doing. And then to also let students know, you said you want to have more help when you're confused on a lesson or when you make a mistake. And that's a thing that staff says 100%, no, we're there. We're right there, we're ready to help. And of course they believe they are, but to bridge the divide and then to get the feedback and again, to say, did we make progress on that? So anyway, I think that's part of it. Like seeing, one, the discrepancy, two, when you see students hunger for that data or that information, because then they want to see, did we make a change? So that seems to be something that drives that.
I think it's just so exciting to hear a myth buster, because a lot of times as adults, we think that we are doing something and we're definitely, our heart and our actions are in the right place, but we find out we don't always hit the mark. I can even attest to that as a parent. You know, I think I'm doing something in particular, and then my children say, well, no, not so much. So just being able to, again, have that student voice there helps us to check ourselves as adults who care in the system. Go ahead, Kim.
When prior to the pandemic, we had a fairly robust student superintendent's advisory group, and we would go through and do leadership training for them. And they worked on some different projects. They helped us build our teacher profile as we were trying to identify who are the teachers we want working in our district. And so we plan to get back to that. During the pandemic, it was definitely harder to do some of those things, especially because we didn't have the time to do the leadership training together and build trust as a group. So it became a much more grassroots based, informal opportunity for student voice. But we're ramping that back up. We are going to be using a thought exchange with our students as well, to lead some conversations. We have an event planned for the day after Labor Day. I'm sorry, not Labor Day, Veterans Day, that is building on the idea of service and engagement, and then is also going to outline the state seal for civic engagement, so our students are aware, become more aware of it, and get an idea of how to earn that, but also being able to recognize veterans and service, and the engagement is a lifelong commitment. And then with that, we're going to be utilizing that information as we're looking at our strategic plan, and we'll be doing some more leadership development as a group to build that trust. And we know that, you know, the team building that we did with our students when they were sixth graders, team building and teamwork looks much different now that they're 10th and 11th graders. And so just getting back and reiterating those things is going to be one of the key pieces that we're doing as we're moving forward with student voice.
Wonderful. You know, as others are listening, and those who will, you know, listen to the recording are thinking, you know, we really want to increase student voice in our systems as well. We believe it's very important. We're doing some things we'd like to increase and do more. And all of you have shared some really great best practices that you've put in place in your districts, and some very practical ideas like the Zen Garden. I'd be remiss as a host, though, if I did not ask you about challenges, because we know everything is not rainbows and unicorns and skipping through the daisies whenever we try to implement something. And implementing authentic, the collection of authentic student voice and then actually doing something with that, I just have to believe does meet with its challenges. So if each of you don't mind just kind of sharing some of the challenges that you've encountered in doing this work, and ways that you are either overcoming the challenges or looking to overcome the challenges.
Yeah, so some of the challenges that we see, that I've seen here, has been the students' lack of confidence. They just haven't had a lot of confidence. They haven't had a lot of encouragement of what they were doing. So I think building and giving them the opportunity to come and speak to us, I've seen a change in their confidence. Now they can come and see, hey, this is what we would like to do. So we want to see things go a little differently. We've had some kids that came and tell some stories, and part of their stories were talking about, there's some kids on campus who feel the same way I feel, and I felt really depressed. I felt really hurt. What can we do to reach out to them? So we ended up taking steps to help them, and now they have the confidence knowing that when they come to us with an issue or concern, they know it's going to be heard. They know we're going to help them, and they know that we're going to be able to do that. Part of the challenges is having those kids, making sure that we reach all the kids, and not knowing who's in need, how we're going to help them. That's one of the challenges we're still trying to get to.
Yeah, I'll echo that and say you kind of have to be prepared for anything with these student conversations. And so we've learned to kind of have folks on deck to help out for a student who might be in need, who share trauma or a crisis. Because those things come up, and so yeah, it's be prepared for anything. Those have been the unexpected, but of course, ultimately helpful to be able to get the services to a student in need. But because we're carefully not only targeting the presidents of clubs and the leaders of the student community only, and we're reaching out to students who might otherwise not be asked of their opinion, sometimes those students bring other issues with them that need attention. And so I would say that's a challenge, right? Because to have a group of students, but also maybe a counselor on deck to say, let's pull you aside and chat for a minute, so that we can not brush a very important issue aside. And yet, not also, we do want to hear from all students. So I appreciate you said that, because I think that's been one of our learnings for the personal story part of this.
Yeah.
So definitely a negative, but a positive. Out of our student voice programs that we were doing prior to the pandemic, we had a group of students who still students, but also alumni that learned the skills, found their voice, started giving input. And then over the summer of 2020, when all the different things that were happening, due to the pandemic, due to the social unrest, they put together a chapter of Diversify Our Narrative, or DAWN, and reached out to our campus. And they wanted to really look at the diversity of our narrative text that we were using, the course offerings. And so it was awesome to see them take what they had learned in exercising their student voice and put it to work. And so we began meeting with them. We helped them get in contact, even do a presentation with our Board of Education of the things that they were feeling and seeing. And they were doing it as an outside organization, not as an official or a grand organization. And so as we moved through some things, they sponsored a book club that we did. As we brought in ethnic studies as a course, all of those pieces, but we're not going fast enough for them. And that has been the hardest. It's hard because I love their passion. I love seeing how committed they are. But you throw in all the things that the adults have to do to then move the adults to do some of those things. So I think the biggest challenges that we've faced is being able to support student voice and do something about it, but to do it at a time and an expediency that the students would like to see it happen, and trying to help them understand. I hate saying that I work in a bureaucracy, but I work in a bureaucracy that's public education. And every time we get money and a plan and a report and something else that's coming, it slows down the work that we're doing with the students. So that has been the challenge. And so we've just trying to help them understand that we are still committed and we still want to follow through. We're just not quite going at the speed they would like. And so we're trying to come up with ways that they can move things forward without us. That doesn't need to come from an official arm of the school to make adjustments and to make changes and to be engaged with the conversation of education. So that's my positive, because they have all that passion, but at the same time, we're just not moving fast enough. And I think we all share in that frustration from time to time in education.
I would say the challenge that we've had is that there are more responsibilities that are on our school sites now than there ever has been. We're testing, we're contact tracing, we're doing a number of things, and we're shorthanded. And it's not just us, it's everyone in the nation. So we are looking at, putting more people in place in our schools, but that process of getting those individuals has not been as expedient as we would have liked it. So, we're literally doing interviews on Saturdays and gathering people together and bringing back retirees to help us with some of the responsibilities that we have with COVID, just so that we can be assured that school keeps going and that we have all the resources that we need in order to address all the needs of our students. But it has been challenging, and we've had to think outside the box. And so with all of this, I feel like we're coming back down to some normalization finally, but it's been a challenge getting everyone in place.
Well, I thank you all for being so transparent and what the challenges really are. And we know the youth that we have the opportunity to serve today, they are used to things being very instantaneous. Back in the day, we used to talk about the microwave generation. Well, they're way beyond the microwave generation. I mean, they are used to like milliseconds for things to happen. And to, again, go back to the voice of the student quote that was read at the very beginning of our session, for them to feel that we are indeed doing something, but yet and still understanding that doing something does not always happen. We talked about it today and it's implemented tomorrow. And then when you couple with it the reality of returning to in-person instruction and all of the different tasks and duties that are on, again, not to be used as excuses, but the reality in helping to communicate to students and to others. So I'd like to, before we go into our questions in just a moment, ask if there is any words of wisdom, any guidance you'd like to share to someone who may be watching this webinar, who feels, we're not really doing much as it relates to gathering student voice, authentic student voice, and or doing something substantial with it. What words of wisdom or guidance would you share to someone who is in that very beginning state in this work?
Well, I would say this, student voice comes out sometimes in a lot of different ways, and beyond verbal sometimes, it's the nonverbal communication that takes place. Keep your eyes on the data that we always are concerned with: attendance, grades, engagement, what's happening there, the number of referrals, what are the mental health team, what are they seeing, what are they dealing with? So student voice can come out through a number of different channels, and don't stay focused just on one channel, but make sure you keep your hand and your pulse on all the channels. That's what I would recommend.
And I'll mention also that as someone who I think, over the time I've been in this role, we've moved from not hearing student voice at the district level to this degree to now having, what I think is a better sense of that and more frequent. There's never been a time when we haven't asked some of these very vulnerable and difficult questions, because the answers will be honest, but there's never been a time when we haven't found that to be a net positive for the system. So I just encourage, if there's folks who are feeling like, I don't know, this could really be tough, it's so valuable. And it's just wonderful to go to the next group and say, here's what kids said. I mean, there's just nothing better than to be able to say that. So I don't know, I can totally understand and feel that reticence that I felt as well, but boy, is it worth it. So it's just a general encouragement to go ahead and step in and ask, because they're talking about it anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would look at saying, be prepared, be brave, and don't take it personally. When they come to you, it's just the way they feel. Don't personalize it, but just use the information to move forward.
I think my biggest piece of advice would be, remember that you're doing this so that you can do what's best for kids. But you also have to deal with and massage adult egos in the process, because you don't want them to feel undervalued. And so the thing I think that helped us the most was when we were going out and hearing from our students, and they weren't the typical leaders. We were involving the adults of the leadership groups. So our ASB advisor, our student government advisor, our peer leader advisor, all those advisors, we didn't necessarily involve those students, but we made sure the adults knew why we weren't talking to just their kids, why we were talking to other kids, and why other kids' voices sometimes had more weight, not because we didn't value what the ASB student was saying, but the ASB student, they were already either saw a path to fixing things or were really pleased with how things were going. And we wanted to find the students that didn't feel that way. And so keeping the adults involved in the process along the way and building their level of understanding of what we were doing helped massage some of the conversations. And then also they became advocates for the work that we were doing with the kids. They were able to explain to their students why their students weren't necessarily involved in each and every step of the process.
That is very key. And yes, Dr. Ayala.
I have a follow-up question for Kimberly. So how do you assure that you're getting a broad representation of student voice? What are some of the best practices that you've been doing for that?
So we have some people in our district office that have worked at the various sites, and over time may have worked at a site where they saw students go from kindergarten to 6th grade, and now they're in high school. And so they have some connections to some students or to some families. We talked about what was the profile of the student that we wanted to hear from. We wanted a combination of grade levels, skill sets. We wanted to look at what were they involved in? Were they involved in the arts? Were they not involved at all? Were they involved in journalism? We also looked at how long had they been with us? Were we a new school for them, or had they been in our district since kindergarten? And so we built, kind of trying to make sure that we had 2 or 3 kids in each area that we could check off. And then we did have some ASB leaders that did fit the profile in some circumstances. We did have some peer leaders that fit the profile. We did look at striking an ethnic balance that represented the ethnicities of our student population. We focused it primarily at grades 6 through 12 of the students that we worked with. We also looked for a gender balance. And so we were very deliberate in putting the group together. And we reached out to counselors and said, we need an English learner who is a long-term English learner but is involved in school. And then we need an English learner long-term who is not very involved in school, because we also saw it as an opportunity to give them ownership, hear their voice, and hopefully get them to come to school and be involved and make gains. So we were very deliberate in how we built that group.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And some of what you were saying a little earlier about the adults is a great segue into one of the questions that we've received from the participants. And I just want to underscore again, I love the way Pat said how just understanding and getting that student voice, because they're talking about it anyway. Truer words have never been said. They are talking about it anyway. And when Henry spoke to not personalizing the responses, if we want authentic student voice, we have to be prepared to hear some things that might invoke some emotion. And so when you think about that, and you think that it's not just those who value student voice, but all of the adults in your system that need to be able to be receptive and ready to hear what students have to say, and also to be able to respond to their thoughts and their ideas. One of the questions we received was specifically around support for those adults. So what are some of the strategies that you're undertaking to train your teachers and staff to uplift student voice? And so it twofold: collecting the student voice, of course, but I think most importantly, valuing the student voice that comes forward. What are some of those strategies you're using to train the teachers and the adults in your system to be able to uplift student voice?
I don't know that it's formal training. It's a lot of conversations. We did, before we launched everything about 3 years ago, we worked with iSchool and their SLED program, and that involved teachers and really looking, it was more about instruction and student voice in the classroom. How do you build and go to that discovery learning and that gradual release of responsibility to where the students are really leading the conversations. So it's been follow up on that. It's been continued conversations, and it's been showing them the data. You know, when we have the meetings are open, and teachers can come during their prep period and can see and hear the conversations that are going on. We share all the artifacts back out with the teachers so that they can have conversations. And then we usually have a counselors over there with us, some principals over there with us during the process, so they can also take that back and infuse that into the work they're doing. But it's a lot of conversations. I wish that there was a training of how to take and student voice and be actionable with it. And if there's a training out there for that, I'd love to hear what it is and to know as well. But it's been a lot of conversations and sharing the data.
Anyone else like to jump in on that?
I think the other thing about that for us has been this call that everyone has been hearing for social emotional learning is well united with this idea of making sure students have an opportunity to express themselves, to name what they're sort of experiencing, to give them an opportunity to say how they're feeling and to get that need met. And so that SEL conversation is all wrapped up with student voice. And so for us, it's been about getting we have some SEL coordinators, again, like Mark mentioned, some of the things we've been able to add on with some of this recent funding has been tied up with both goals in mind, right? So it's under the guise of social emotional learning, and part of that is being able to name a feeling, express a need, and privilege the fact that everyone in the room has an opportunity to say what that is. And then there's a safe and appropriate way to do that. And so I think that's that. And like Kim said, showing the data, right? When one of the other questions in the pigeonholes about student learning, and when you show teachers that, only 70% of the students say that my teacher lets me explain my idea. That's huge. Now it's better than the state average, but that just doesn't seem good enough, right? Like right there, that's about saying that students want to say their idea. They want to say, but only 7 out of 10 get to. So I think that data is helpful.
Well, there's one other question that kind of relates to that, Pat. And I know we just have a couple of minutes left together, but I would like to throw this out in case there's anything that any of you would like to share or respond to. And it's really around how you're empowering your students, your scholars, if you will, to be civically engaged as a way of increasing student voice as well. All of you've kind of opened the door, if you will, for students to feel empowered to share their thoughts and ideas, and not just share them, but to expect that something is going to happen for them. What might be ways that you are looking at empowering scholars to be civically engaged in continuing to use their student voice?
That's a really timely question. Civic engagement right now is fraught. And so maybe there's never been a more important time to teach thoughtful civic engagement and voice in a public sphere. I would say that I don't know that I don't have a good answer for that right now, because we do get a lot of student commentary, but board meetings and those kinds of things they're fraught. That's all I can really say safely. They're just difficult right now.
Most definitely, and I appreciate the honesty. Go ahead, Kim.
We are going to utilize our student groups in helping us develop what are criteria and some samples, and outlining what our seal of civic engagement will look like. And so we're going to use the group for that. We're also looking at how we embed some of those activities in our middle school study skills class, our freshman seminar class, and our senior seminar class. We don't want to just leave it for the senior year because it misses the opportunity. Civic engagement can start, so much earlier, and we have clubs and organizations that do things like Kindness Week, and we do food drives, and we do some different things with recognizing military service. And so it's a matter of really helping the students see that it's all of these pieces, and it's not just a food drive because it's Thanksgiving time, or it's not just being kind because it's Kindness Week, that it really is something that if you're civically engaged, you're involved on a regular basis. And then also that piece for our high school students, bringing in the opportunity for pre-registration as well as registration, and helping them understand the power of their vote, and how we talk to one another and have civil discourse. As Pat said, if there's ever been a time for our society to learn how to be civil with one another while they're engaged, now is the time.
Definitely agree with that. And I think our young people are getting a lot of non-examples. And so for us to be able to build off of that would be absolutely great. I just would like to thank each and every one of you for sharing all of the wonderful things that are happening in your districts. You have just given us so much information to think, to process, and to, again, do something with. And I just would like to thank each and every one of you for the time that you've given. So if we were in a room and not in the Zoom room, you just hear all of this applause. So you just get to hear me. But again, I thank you for that. I would like to say to all of our participants that we really would love to have your feedback on this particular session. And if you would like to engage in further dialogue with one or more of the panelists, maybe you heard something and you're like, I really want to know more about that. Please take an opportunity to complete the survey via the link that was placed in the chat. Your feedback is going to be very, very helpful as we continue to move forward with our series, Building Better from Disruption. And it also, again, provides opportunity for our panelists to hear feedback from you as well. And again, gives you a link if you do need to connect with anyone that's speaking. In our last minute together, I just would like to give you a preview of what's coming, because this is just session one, everyone. And wow, we've just really kicked off with a very powerful one. But I do want to let everyone know in closing that our next session is going to be on November 17th. And the topic is also going to focus on social emotional learning, but it's going to focus on the social emotional learning as we look at the adults in our system and how to build that adult capacity in those areas. So we encourage you to come back for that. And in December, just give you a little bit of preview of other things that are coming in the month of December, on December 15th specifically. We'll kind of shift gears a little bit, still staying within the same topic of importance to students, but we're going to talk about accelerating learning. And we'll have opportunity to hear models and structures that are being used across our region in that area. When we come back in 2022 after the holidays, we're excited to let you know we have a keynote session for you with Dr. Sean Harper from the Race and Diversity Center at the University of Southern California, a person who is near and dear to all of us. I know Mark, years ago, when we were both at Riverside County Office of Education, had opportunity to reach out to him. He's a phenomenal person, and he will be speaking to us as it relates to racial disparities and things for us to know and keep an eye on as we're going forward. And we also may have one other session for you at the beginning of 2022. So I asked you just to pin on your calendar all of these important dates. It's an hour of power, if you will, to be able to engage in these topics, hear from some various STEAM panelists, and also be able to ask questions as well. So I thank you all for, again, joining us this afternoon. I do hope that it is something that you are able to take away some very good nuggets of information as you move forward to do your work. And Dr. Ayala, I'd like to give it to you if you'd like to give any closing words as we get ready to close the webinar. You are on mute, Dr. Ayala. I know those were powerful words.
18 months, still haven't learned the toys, but there were a lot of powerful ideas here. What really resonated with me, two things. One is this idea about building students' confidence around expressing their student voice. Multiple of you talked about how we have to cultivate that, right? For our students. And then the fear associated with listening to the student voice. Patrick said, all of his experiences have been a net positive, right? But that you're stepping into a place that could be murky. But on the end, it's a way to help move students towards success. So I thank you all, such learned leaders. Thank you for your insights, and thank you for your service to the students here in the Inland Empire. And thank you, Dr. Glover Woods, for your hosting.
Thank you, Dr. Ayala, and to all of our participants. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you next month for our next topic. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon.